Every statement you mailed showed the account steadily growing.
Those numbers were good faith projections.
The money was already spent within weeks.
For years, dozens of people trusted Tarek Moumen with everything they had saved for retirement. Every single one of them was wrong to.
You had no track record and a history of losses.
Every client signed knowing the risks involved.
He would not get the chance to explain. By the end of the week, federal agents would have his laptop, his phone, and 3 years of bank records showing exactly where every dollar had gone. 42 investors, $9.5 million, $1 million house in Leesburg, a brand new Tesla still smelling of factory plastic, and a stack of monthly account statements showing portfolios that had never existed at all. Before we go any further, have you ever handed your retirement savings to someone because they had a confident pitch and a nice suit? Drop a comment and tell me what made you trust them. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We hold men like this accountable every single week, and the cases only get harder to watch from here. Tarek Moumen was born in 1979 in Alexandria, Egypt, the second of 3 children in a middle-class household that valued education above almost everything else. His father was a civil engineer for a state-run construction firm. His mother taught secondary school mathematics. The family lived in a modest apartment 2 blocks from the Mediterranean, and Tarek grew up watching tankers and cargo ships move through one of the oldest harbors in the world. Family friends remember him as quiet, focused, and unusually serious for a boy his age. In 1992, when Tarek was 13, the family emigrated to the United States. His father had accepted a project management position with a Northern Virginia engineering firm, and the Moumens settled in Annandale, a suburb of Washington, just outside the Beltway. Tarek finished middle school at Poe and then went to W.T. Woodson High School, where teachers remembered him as polite, ambitious, and unusually fluent in the language of grown-ups. By 16, he was already reading the business section of the Washington Post over breakfast, asking his father about interest rates and currency markets, and telling anyone who asked that he wanted to work in finance. He enrolled at George Mason University in 1997 and earned a bachelor's degree in finance in 2001. Classmates from those years describe a quiet, well-dressed student who carried a leather portfolio everywhere and talked openly about wanting to work on Wall Street. He never worked on Wall Street. He took an entry-level job at a small retail brokerage in Tyson's Corner, cold calling residents of Loudoun and Fairfax counties and selling them mutual funds and annuities. Starting salary, $28,000 a year plus commission. For 5 years he worked the phones. Performance reviews from that period describe him as personable on calls, comfortable with high net worth prospects, and occasionally in need of guidance on compliance paperwork. He passed his Series 7 in 2002 and his Series 63 the year after. He was not a star. He was not a failure. He was, by every internal measure, an average producer at a small Virginia brokerage that itself was nothing special. His commissions paid for a leased BMW and a 1-bedroom apartment in Reston. His ambition wanted more. In 2006, he married Yasmin Halabi, a pharmacist he had met through family friends. They had 2 children, a son in 2008 and a daughter in 2011. Yasmin would later tell investigators that her husband worked late, traveled constantly to meet with what he called high-value clients, and was extremely private about the specifics of his business. He kept his laptop locked. He kept his office door closed. She believed every word of it, because for the first 6 years of her marriage, she had no reason not to. In 2009, in the wake of the financial crisis, Tarek left the brokerage and went out on his own. He told his family he had built up a private book of investors who wanted him to run their money directly, outside the constraints of the firm. He told the firm he was leaving for personal opportunities. The truth was simpler. His commission income had cratered with the markets. His lease on the BMW was 3 months in arrears, and he was looking for something that would pay him the way his ambition believed he deserved to be paid. He registered a single-member LLC with the Virginia State Corporation Commission in March of that year. The name on the formation paperwork was Crescent Ridge Capital Partners. He printed business cards. He bought a domain name, He told his wife he had just been offered the chance to manage $200,000 for a former client. None of that last part was true either. To understand what Tarek Moumen did, you have to understand something specific about how the American investment industry actually works. The public believes that anyone holding investor money is being watched by someone. They imagine an army of regulators sitting in glass towers, reading every transaction in real time, flagging anything that looks wrong. That is not how it works. There are two main tracks for someone managing money in the United States. A registered investment advisor files paperwork with the SEC or with a state securities regulator, lists the assets under management, identifies the custodian holding the funds, and submits to periodic audits. A broker-dealer is a different animal, regulated by FINRA, with its own books and records requirements. Both tracks demand independent custody. That means the person managing the money is never supposed to be the same person physically holding the money. Tarek Moumen operated outside both tracks. Crescent Ridge Capital Partners was never registered as an investment advisor. It was never registered as a broker-dealer. It existed as a Virginia LLC with a single member, a checking account at a regional bank in Reston, and a website that listed an address in a shared executive suite building in Tyson's Corner. Mail forwarded, no real office, no employees besides the founder, no custodian, no auditor, no regulator on the other end of any quarterly filing. For an unsophisticated investor, none of that was visible. What they saw was a confident, well-spoken man in a tailored suit who had grown up in the area, who held a Series 7 from a decade in the industry, who used the right vocabulary, and who had a website with a Bloomberg-style ticker scrolling across the top. He told them he was a hedge fund manager. He told them he ran a strategy that consistently beat the S&P 500 by 3 to 5 points a year. He told them he was overseeing tens of millions of dollars on behalf of doctors, executives, and retirees across Northern Virginia. They believed him because nothing about him made them want to doubt. The SEC does not call random Loudoun County residents to ask if their money is in good hands. FINRA does not investigate people who never filed for FINRA membership. The Virginia Division of Securities only reacts to complaints. If no one complains, no one looks. And as long as the statements show the money growing, no one complains. His first investor was a man named Howard Whitfield, a 61-year-old retired Loudoun County school administrator with a $400,000 401k that he had built over 32 years in public education. Howard had met Tarek at a charity fundraiser at the Lansdowne Resort in 2010. They sat at the same table. Tarek listened with apparent fascination as Howard talked about his coaching career, his late wife's first round of treatment, and his grandchildren. By the end of the evening, they had exchanged numbers. Howard called him the following Tuesday. 3 months later, Howard rolled over his entire retirement account into a Crescent Ridge managed strategy fund. There was no fund. There was a checking account at the regional bank, into which Howard's $400,000 was deposited, and from which Tarek immediately drew $45,000 to pay down a credit card and refinance the lease on his SUV. Howard's first statement arrived a month later, printed on letterhead Tarek had designed himself in Microsoft Publisher. It showed an account balance of $400 to $800, a modest gain, believable. A second statement followed at the end of the next quarter. $411,400. The S&P 500 had returned 6% that year. Howard's account was up just under 8. Crisp, conservative outperformance. Exactly what Tarek had pitched. The money was already gone. Tarek had used it to cover 4 months of personal expenses, a down payment on a leased BMW, and to repay an earlier debt to a family friend who had loaned him $50,000 during the brokerage years. Howard never asked to withdraw. He was 61, healthy, and patient. He told his friends about the nice young man managing his money. He referred 2 of them, then 3 more, then a couple from his bridge club, then his sister-in-law in Maryland. Within 18 months, Crescent Ridge had 19 clients, each holding statements that showed steady, conservative growth on portfolios that did not exist. The mechanics were always the same. New money came in. Tarek deposited it into the single Crescent Ridge checking account. He immediately drew out a portion for personal expenses. He sometimes wired a portion to another account he controlled and then back into Crescent Ridge, creating the appearance of trading activity in the bank records. When an older investor asked for a small withdrawal, he paid them out of the new investor's deposit. The technical term for the structure is a Ponzi scheme. Tarek would later tell his attorney he had never heard the phrase used about his own conduct until the day he was charged. By 2013, the account statements had become a full-time job. Tarek had built a master spreadsheet that calculated fictional monthly returns for each client account, varying the percentages slightly to look authentic. Some months were down 0.5%, some months were up 2%. The portfolio drift over years showed a steady upward curve consistent with a moderately aggressive growth strategy. The spreadsheet existed nowhere except on Tarek's laptop. The portfolios existed nowhere at all. In April 2014, Tarek and Yasmin closed on a $1 million house on a 1-acre lot in a gated section of Leesburg called River Creek. The mortgage application listed Tarek's income as $420,000 a year from investment management activities. The down payment, $310,000, was wired from the Crescent Ridge operating account 2 days after a 60-year-old widow from Sterling deposited her late husband's life insurance settlement into the same account. 2 weeks after moving in, Tarek drove a new Tesla Model S off the lot at the Tyson's Galleria showroom. Cash purchase, $94,000. The funds came from the same operating account, less than 72 hours after a retired Navy chief from Manassas had liquidated his TSP account and wired the proceeds to Crescent Ridge. The Tesla was pearl white with 21-inch wheels and a premium sound package. Yasmin took a picture of him in the driveway the day he brought it home. She sent it to her sister with a heart emoji. Stories like this don't get the attention they deserve. We're about to get into the investigation in the courtroom. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel covers cases that most outlets ignore. Subscribe if you believe these stories matter, and stick around. The next part is where everything starts to fall apart for him, and it falls apart fast. The catalyst came in the spring of 2016, and it came from the most patient investor on the list. Howard Whitfield, the retired school administrator, was now 67 years old. He had been told for 6 years that his account was growing steadily. His most recent statement, dated February 2016, showed a balance of $611,200. Just over a 50% gain since he had first invested, beating the S&P benchmark Tarek had quoted him by a comfortable margin. Howard's wife Marlene had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's the previous October. They had decided to sell their house, move into a single-level townhouse closer to their daughter, and use a chunk of the retirement savings to cover the difference and pay for the in-home care Marlene would eventually need. Howard called Tarek on a Tuesday afternoon in April and asked to withdraw $200,000. Tarek told him it would take 10 business days to liquidate the position cleanly without triggering any tax inefficiencies. Howard said that was fine. 10 business days came and went. Tarek stopped returning calls. When Howard finally reached him, Tarek explained that the SEC had placed a temporary hold on certain hedge fund redemption requests as part of a routine compliance review. He apologized profusely. He said it would be resolved within 2 weeks. He used the phrase "quiet period" 4 separate times in the conversation. Howard wrote that phrase down in a notebook he kept by the kitchen phone. There was no SEC review. There was no money. The Crescent Ridge operating account on the day Howard called to request his withdrawal contained $11,400. Tarek had spent the previous Saturday at the mosque in Annandale, soliciting donations for the Northern Virginia Refugee Assistance Fund that he had volunteered to serve as treasurer of since 2014. He had collected $1,900 in cash and personal checks that evening. He deposited it into the Crescent Ridge account the next morning. Howard waited another month, then another. By July, he had begun calling daily. By August, he had hired an attorney. The attorney, a probate lawyer named Daniel Chen, who had handled Howard's estate planning, did something simple. He sent a formal letter on firm letterhead demanding documentation of the holdings in Howard's account, including the name of the custodian bank, the QSIP numbers for any securities held, and copies of the underlying trade confirmations going back to 2010. Tarek did not respond. 3 weeks later, Daniel Chen forwarded the matter to the Virginia Division of Securities, the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office, and the SEC Division of Enforcement. The complaint was 12 pages long and included 6 years of monthly statements, every one of them forged. The complaint landed on the desk of an SEC enforcement attorney named Patricia Olerud in late September 2016. Patricia had spent 11 years prosecuting investment advisor fraud cases. She read Daniel Chen's letter twice. By the end of the day, she had pulled the Crescent Ridge entity records from the Virginia State Corporation Commission and confirmed what she already suspected. No SEC registration, no state registration, no filings of any kind. A man holding himself out as a hedge fund manager had never once submitted a single regulatory form. The FBI joined the investigation in October. Special Agent Marcus Beal, assigned to the Financial Crime Squad of the Washington Field Office, took the lead. His first move was a federal grand jury subpoena for every bank account associated with Tarek Moumen, or Crescent Ridge Capital Partners. The records came back in 2 weeks. They told the whole story. 42 depositors, $9.5 million in incoming wires and check deposits over 6.5 years. Outgoing transactions consisting almost entirely of personal expenses. Restaurant charges at Morton's and Capitol Grill in Tyson's. Tuition payments to a private school in Loudoun County. The Tesla, the mortgage on the River Creek house, a second car, a Range Rover, leased and paid monthly. Vacations to Dubai, the south of France, and the Maldives. A timeshare in Vail. The largest single category of outflow, after personal living expenses, was payments back to earlier investors. Classic Ponzi mechanics, paid for in cash, withdrawn from the deposits of newer victims. Then, Agent Beal found the GoFundMe records. In 2015, Tarek had personally organized an online fundraiser to support a family of Syrian refugees that the Moumen's Mosque had agreed to sponsor. He had raised $41,000 across 3 months from friends, family, and members of the Northern Virginia community. Of that, $8,000 had been forwarded to the refugee family. The remaining $33,000 had been deposited into the Crescent Ridge operating account and spent on the mortgage and on a vacation to Cabo San Lucas the following month. There was also the Northern Virginia Refugee Assistance Fund, the one Tarek had volunteered to serve as treasurer for in 2014. Audits of that account showed $19,000 in unexplained withdrawals over an 18-month period, every one of them traceable to transfers into Crescent Ridge. Agent Beal interviewed 28 of the 42 investors over the next 4 months. He learned that 23 of them were within 10 years of retirement at the time they invested. 11 were already retired. The average investment size was just over $200,000, but the range went from $45,000 on the low end to $900,000 on the high end. The $900,000 investor was a Vietnam veteran from Manassas who had cashed out his entire pension lump sum at the urging of a friend who had referred him to Tarek. The smoking gun was on Tarek's laptop. When agents executed the search warrant on the Leesburg house in February 2017, they recovered a Dell desktop computer in the basement office. On its hard drive was the master spreadsheet. 42 tabs, one for each investor, with fictional monthly returns calculated back to the original deposit date. Beside it sat a folder labeled Statements, containing 6.5 years of PDF documents on Crescent Ridge letterhead, every one of them generated from the spreadsheet. The portfolios, the history, the entire fiction, sitting on a desktop computer in a basement next to a stack of unopened mail and a printer still warm from the most recent quarterly run. On the morning of February 14, 2017, 2 FBI agents and a Loudoun County Sheriff's deputy approached the front door of the River Creek house at 7:18 a.m. Yasmin answered the door in a bathrobe. Her 2 children were eating cereal at the kitchen island. Tarek was upstairs in the master bedroom, knotting a tie in the mirror, preparing for a 9:00 a.m. coffee meeting with a prospective client in Tyson's Corner. The deputy's body cam captured what happened next. "Mr. Moumen, you need to come downstairs. Hands where I can see them. What is this?" "Yasmin, what's happening?" "Sir, come down the stairs, slowly. We have a warrant for your arrest." "A warrant for what?" "There has to be a mistake. Federal arrest warrant out of the Eastern District of Virginia. Securities fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. We also have a search warrant for the residence." "This is a misunderstanding. Let me call my attorney. Let me explain." "You'll have plenty of opportunity to explain, sir. Right now, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. My clients are happy. Talk to them. Talk to Howard Whitfield. Talk to anyone. They will tell you. Mr. Moumen, Howard Whitfield is the reason we are standing in your house this morning." The body cam captured the exact moment the color left his face. He stopped trying to talk. He turned around. He let the agents put the cuffs on him in the foyer of the $1 million house his investors had bought for him. As they walked him to the unmarked sedan in the driveway, the Tesla sat in the garage behind him, its charging cable still plugged into the wall. Yasmin stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. The children watched from the kitchen island, cereal spoons frozen halfway to their faces. The indictment came down 2 weeks later. 42 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of securities fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft, based on the use of investor signatures on forged authorization forms. Tarek's first attorney, a Northern Virginia white-collar defense lawyer named Edward Reyes, initially advised him to take the case to trial. After 3 months of reviewing discovery, including the spreadsheet, the statements, the bank records, and the recorded interviews with 28 separate victims, Reyes changed his advice. He told his client there was no defense available, not one. The records on the laptop alone would convict him in front of any jury in the country. Tarek pleaded guilty on July 11, 2017, before U.S. District Judge Anthony J. Trenga in the federal courthouse in Alexandria. The plea covered the lead wire fraud count and 1 securities fraud count, with the government agreeing to dismiss the remaining charges in exchange for full cooperation in the asset recovery process. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for October 6, 2017. The government filed a sentencing memorandum recommending the high end of the guidelines, citing the duration of the scheme, the number of victims, the targeting of retirement age investors, and what the prosecutors described as the particularly callous use of charitable donations as a personal slush fund. The defense memorandum asked for a downward variance, citing Tarek's lack of criminal history, his cooperation, and what his attorney called a fundamentally good man who lost his way under financial pressure. 11 victims spoke at the sentencing hearing. Howard Whitfield went first. He told the court that he had returned to part-time work at the age of 68, substitute teaching at the same elementary school he had once supervised, because the savings he had spent 32 years building were gone. He said his wife's care would now be funded by their daughter and son-in-law, who had taken out a home equity line to cover the gap. He said he had stopped sleeping through the night. He said the worst part was not the money. The worst part was that he had told friends to invest with the same man. A widow from Sterling named Linda Reyes spoke next. She had given Tarek her husband's $312,000 life insurance settlement 4 years earlier. She said she had trusted him because he reminded her of her own son. A retired Navy chief named Walter Pham, the man whose TSP rollover had funded the Tesla, addressed the court for 9 minutes. He did not look at Tarek once. He said, "I served this country for 26 years. I expected the man who held my pension to honor a smaller commitment than that. I was wrong." Judge Trenga listened to every victim statement without interrupting. When he delivered his sentencing remarks, he spoke for nearly 15 minutes. The portion that the local press would quote in the morning was this: "What you did was not a financial mistake. It was not poor judgment. It was a sustained, calculated, and morally indefensible course of conduct, repeated against 42 separate people, many of whom trusted you because they had no reason not to. You sold them a resume you did not possess. You took the savings of men and women who had spent their working lives earning that money one paycheck at a time, and you spent it on a house and a Tesla and a vacation to the south of France. And when one of them needed to withdraw a portion of his own money to care for his wife, you lied to him for months while that money sat in your driveway in the form of a luxury car. The fact that you also stole from a refugee charity, in my view, removes any argument that this conduct was an aberration. It was who you chose to be every day for 6.5 years. The judge sentenced Tarek Moumen to 126 months in federal prison, 10.5 years, 3 years of supervised release, restitution of $7.5 million, forfeiture of $9.5 million, including the house, the Tesla, the Range Rover, and every account the FBI had been able to trace. He was designated to FCI Cumberland, a low-security federal correctional institution in Western Maryland. His projected release date sits in 2026. The house in River Creek was sold at federal auction in early 2018 for $912,000. The Tesla brought $38,000 at a federal asset auction in Manassas. Howard Whitfield received $11,400 in initial restitution, almost the exact balance Tarek's operating account had held on the day Howard first asked to withdraw his own money. The rest of his savings, the savings of his 32 years in public education, has not been recovered, and according to court filings, likely never will be. This case was infuriating, but the next case on the right-hand side somehow manages to be worse. Click it now.